So we're going to go now to our first speaker. Helen Joyce is a journalist, author, and campaigner for clarity about sex in life and law. What were the reactions and what was the reception to the book Trans?
In some ways an awful lot better than I thought it would be. It was a book that I spent a long time trying to decide whether I really would write it, because I didn't expect that I'd find it easy to find a publisher, and indeed so it proved. But one is enough. And the publisher I got, I couldn't have asked for better. They were just fantastic about it, and my editor was brilliant, and it was actually very smooth. And then it got great reviews. So I've only had a couple of negative reviews, and they're from people I don't think very highly of. So I did get reviews in nearly all the mainstream British papers. Of course, I am still never mentioned in my home country. There's an absolute taboo on my name in Ireland, in Irish media. It's extraordinary. So the reaction was a lot better than I thought. But I suppose one person's reaction is worth talking about specifically, and that's my own. Like, the reason I wrote this book was to get it out of my system. I really felt like I was being driven mad. It wasn't something that I was working in. I wasn't working for a feminist organization, though I would also said I was a feminist. I was the finance editor of The Economist at the time that I was writing it. And then running our, I have a habit at The Economist, or had a habit at The Economist, of moving jobs at precisely the wrong time. I took a job as the executive editor for events, which I agreed to start in March 2020. And it was meant to be about traveling around the world, running large events and sharing them and geocloning them. I know. I
Yeah.
agreed to do that job in about, oh God, I think early 2020. And of course, when I actually came back to it, I had had 2 months off to write my book proposal straight before it. And I came back, I came straight into helping that team to move to Zoom. And, I was stuck in Ireland looking after my parents, and I wrote most of the book there. But so I thought that I had stumbled upon something insane. I didn't know any of the backdrop to it. I'd never heard of Janice Raymond. I'd never heard of Sheila Jeffreys. I'd never heard of Judith Butler. I am not saying those three people are of equal weight or eminence in my mind, just three people I had never heard of. And I'd stumbled on this thing, and it was driving me completely potty. It was stopping me from sleeping. And so I thought, okay, the only way that I can deal with this is to write through it, write it all down, and then I will move on. And
Yeah.
that's the bit that didn't happen. That's the bit that's been impossible. And I also don't want to. I feel like I found what I'm meant to be doing, and I'm getting up every day and doing the right thing. So I may as well just keep going. And so people still want to talk about it. My publisher tells me that it is a book with a long tail. Like, it sold well. It sold well enough to get me into the top 10 the week that it came out. And I think it was in the top 10 a few weeks after that. They tend to go in and out a bit in the UK sales. But I mean, it's still selling.
Mm.
And my royalty check's still decent, even though the book sells obviously for an awful lot less once it goes into paperback, so you get lower royalties. And people are still in touch with me all the time, and people keep still asking me to come on podcasts. And so it's been quite slow burn. So yeah, I think that's a decent enough summary of what the reaction has been.
You were saying that it was surprising for yourself. Was there anything that you were really surprised about while you were doing it? Did you come across things and think, oh no, that's even worse than I thought? Or can you
Yeah,
tell us
but
about anything that was,
constantly.
yeah,
Constantly, and I still am. It happens nearly every day that I have that feeling. I'm sure we all do, where you boggle. And
yeah,
you think, no, 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 this cannot be. They cannot be saying that women in prison are kind and won't mind men being put in with them. I mean, 5 years in the trenches, and of course more for Sheila Jeffreys or Janice Raymond. And I'm sure we're all, or Suzanne Moore or Julie Bindel or all these people who noticed earlier than me, they must still be being astonished. I remember that the moment that I thought, I hope I can say rude words on this, the moment that I thought,
yeah,
holy fuck, was the moment when I really, really, really realized that they meant it, that men could be lesbians.
yeah,
Like, I was so The Economist, there's a very strong weekly rhythm because it's a weekly publication, and Wednesday's the busiest day, especially for section editors, which I was as the finance editor. And I remember distinctly going into work that day. You go in very early, you work a very long day, then you come in and you work very, very long early from like 6 a.m. or so on Thursday, and then the paper goes to press at 12. But I came in early on the Wednesday, and just before the craziness of the day got going, I went across to a friend, good guy who understands all this stuff and thought it was as mad as I did, but a finance writer. And I'd been going and telling him mad things. And I went into him and said, "You're not going to believe it. They really, really think men can be lesbians." They
yeah,
think that you're a bigot if you're a lesbian and you won't sleep with a man. And I mean, he's a
yeah,
heterosexual man married with kids. You know, the two of us looked at each other and went, no, they, and I'm like,
yeah,
they do.
yeah.
I thought it couldn't be real either, you know.
One of the ways I see it is that they're prepared to give up science and maths, you being a mathematician, academic mathematician before doing all this. They're prepared to give up all of that, both science, rationality, in order to do this, in order to get men into women's spaces. That's my very cynical reading of it. So I think it is like in 1984 where Big Brother said, the party won't need science anymore. We don't, we
And
don't need
the
it.
other thing that that has really amazed me and still ongoingly amazes me is that this is an idea that's more popular with women than with men.
Mm,
Like the fact is, if you do opinion polls, if you talk to people, the cheerleaders for this are young women, and they are the people who are most damaged by it. And I have theories about it, and I think that, we can say women are socialized to be kind and so on, but I think too much of those theories, too many of them, rest on the idea that women are great and men are shit. And like, there's no doubt, but that the beating heart or the nuclear power source at the center of this movement is absolutely men and their boners. No doubt
yeah,
about that whatsoever. But the
yeah,
foot soldiers are young women, and there's something very dark about women's psyches, that they are so keen on policing other women, on propping up men's desires, on simping for the men who run the country. And I mean, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. It's a stable um, it's a stable strategy in the world we live in to suck up to men.
In terms of cancellation, did you get cancelled at all?
So I will say that my employer was supportive in exactly the right way. I don't want my employer cheerleading for me, especially an employer that it has a very strong line. Yes, I mean The Economist is for open markets. It's a certain view of the world, a 19th century liberal view. So I mean there's a strong editorial line, but it's a place where that taken into account has a great multiplicity of views. I don't want them going out and cheerleading for me, and I don't want them silencing people who disagree with me. So I think they did that exactly right. All they did was just refuse to sanction me in any way. I wasn't able to keep writing about it, but that's not because I was being sanctioned. It's because it's a paper that has no bylines. And it's a standard rule that we don't get people who are strongly associated with one side of an argument to write on that topic. So if you were somebody who was a vociferous member of an environmental party, you wouldn't be the environment correspondent.
Mm,
So I just think that's moral. So yeah, as soon as I became the story at all, I was not able to write on this subject anymore. So, but by then you see, The Economist, by being such a great place to work, other people had taken it up. So it's continued to cover the topic very well. And so everything that was in the paper from 2018 wasn't written by me. In
yeah.
fact, there might have been one piece I can't remember past that, but it just basically the coverage was not by me. Cancellation is it's such an ill-defined word, and people tried to get me fired. But the funniest attempt, I don't know how many people, like, we're all terminally online in this. We all know, who Relationship and Purposes Robin is, or, when Sally Hines tweets, these are our in jokes. But one of them was this bloke called Anthony Watson, who tried to get himself invited to an economist conference on pride issues in the workplace, and tweeted at me really relentlessly for about 48 hours. And the thing was, he was an advisor to Dawn Butler, who at the time was Labour's LGBT spokesperson, and it really said some very stupid things. Anyway, he tweeted at me, and I immediately got a message from the head honcho at The Economist saying, "I know what's going on. It's fine. Ignore." Well, I don't think she said ignore, and I certainly didn't ignore. So I just had a lot of fun saying, "I'm not running this conference. It's in Hong Kong. Anthony, are you not able to read?" And so on. But but in a different workplace, I'd have lost my job the next day.
Yeah, yeah,
So people complained about me to my employer several times.
yeah.
People internally complained, I'm pretty sure. I don't know that for sure, but I think so. They've every right to do that.
A recent podcast you did, you said that you gave up. It was a big thing to do. You had to think about
Yeah.
it a lot because you gave up one of the last few remaining good jobs, decent jobs in journalism when you gave up being the finance editor at The Economist. And can you tell us about what made you make that decision? Because it was a fantastic job, and there, as you say, there aren't many
Yeah.
available. So what pushed you to do it?
So by the time I left, I wasn't finance editor anymore. I switched from being finance editor to doing that events job, and then I became Britain editor. So I think I've been Britain editor for about a
Oh yeah,
year. had I become Britain editor when my book came out? I think I might just about, yeah, I think that's right. I think I'd started that job then. But people move fairly frequently at The Economist, so that wasn't strange. Um, and I still thought at that point, yes, I did. I took that job before the book came out, and I really thought that, I've got the book out, I've got that off my chest, and now I can focus on this. And, I did. Obviously, I threw myself into the job, but for a start, people kept wanting comment. But also the madness just continued. I mean, I'm sure everyone else feels the same, but this is going faster and faster. I'm getting dizzy every day. The speed of the insanity, but also because we are fighting back well in the UK, and the speed of the response, like it's really every day that there's something happening legislatively, and sometimes it's good things, and the number of consultations we have to respond to, like I'm just dizzy. So that became clear, and there's a concept that I discovered, and I feel a little hesitant saying it because it sounds like I'm appropriating something that's really big for something quite small. And that concept is how was it explained to me? It's a moral injury. That's it. So the woman who was telling me about this is a woman who works in a women's centre. She runs it, in fact, and they're becoming very hard to run. I mean, they've always been hard to run, but the specific thing at the moment is just that the funding is so difficult, and she was so reliant on contracts from probation that she just basically can never do the job that she's meant to do. And probation in the UK was the thing that was squeezed the most under austerity. So probation officers can't do their job either. So then they go sick. So then there's more burden on the ones that are left. And she said to me, do you know the concept of a moral injury? It's when you know what you should be doing, but you cannot do it, and it makes you sick. And so I hesitate to draw from that like really horrific situation where you've got vulnerable women, you're trying to run a women's centre, you've got people in probation. But the fact is I was experiencing a moral injury, which was not imposed on me by The Economist, to be clear. It was that I knew what I should be doing and I couldn't do it. Because when you have a job somewhere, you have to limit what you say to some extent, at least. And obviously, there's just the time element. I was doing a big job. I mean, it's a 60+ hour a week job, no question, probably more. And so I was feeling sick. I had a sore stomach the whole time. I became more and more really thinking every day, I can't cope with this anymore. But I was afraid because, I'm the primary breadwinner. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids. Just you leave something like that, you never get back into it. You just have to accept that. It's not like if I did this 30 or 40 years ago, I could hope to come back into journalism at a similar level that I had left or a bit lower. That's it. I'll never be offered a full-time job in journalism again because nobody offers them. I only had one because I had it since 2005.
Do you feel like you made the right choice?
Oh my God, it was just wonderful. My stomach hasn't hurt since.
Oh,
So
wow.
I rang Maya, who had by this time Maya was the only person I think who was being paid by Sex Matters, and she was not being paid what she's worth by any means because Sex Matters was new. Um, Maybe she had a little bit of admin help, I can't remember. It was very early on, and I said to her, "Is there any chance that I can work for you part time?" Because I needed to have some core income. And then I thought, I'll do a Substack. It's actually not run on Substack, but I still call it a Substack. I'll do some freelance journalism, and I'll take that leap of faith for the rest. And she spent a weekend scrabbling around trying to do a bit of fundraising to see if she couldn't say it was me. She just had to say, look, we've got a chance to have a hire that might be really important for us. And she got some money. And again, then they made a leap of faith. And then I came on a few days a week for Sex Matters. So Maya is still the only person who's full-time at Sex Matters. And we've got about 5 other people who are between 0.1 and me, 0.6. Actually, somebody else is 0.8 time. But that was the core. And after that, I mean, I'm an atheist. I just live once. Every day that goes by. And also on this topic in particular, there's an incredible sense of urgency because every person who gets caught up in the ideology that we're opposing is somebody who is fighting against our rights. Like it's somebody who is seeking to overturn the long-standing principles that men stay out of women's spaces, etc., etc. And also every child who gets caught up in this, even if they don't end up being permanently medicalized, they miss a really crucial part of their youth, and you can't get that back. Like you can never get time back, but your teenage years, to not get them back, that's when you grow up. So every day there's more irreversible harm or damage, as Abigail Schreier said, and every day it becomes more embedded and it'll be harder to get back out. So, it's now or never. I must say, I did originally think that I would just take a year's leave of absence, and The Economist agreed to that. They gave me a year's leave of absence. Again, wishful thinking. I thought I could maybe make a big difference in a year and come back having got, again, hoping I'd scratched the itch or got it off my chest or whatever it was. But I now think I'll be doing this certainly until retirement age and possibly for the rest of my life. I
Yeah.
had no idea how deep it had got.
Is there an audio version of your book?
Yes, there is. It didn't come out at the same time as my book, and my publisher tried to hawk it around. The way it works is you tend to sell the audio rights, and there are 10 companies in the UK that record audiobooks, and not one of them bought it, even though it was by now had been in the top 10. So because they knew they'd get grief, grief, it's not worth it to them. Like I would have had to be J.K. Rowling or somebody to get an audiobook. So I ended up recording it at home. My son, who is now a sound engineer, was still at university studying music tech, and he recorded it in the understairs cupboard for me. And we did it. He did his first. He hated it. He only likes music. He doesn't like spoken word. He actually recorded Louise Perry's book for her as well. She actually did get a deal, but he gave her a better deal. And he said he's never doing it again. He kept telling me how good her book was. I mean, it was actually very odd reading, and then they remove the inner parts of the penis and use the skin that remains. And my son is sitting outside this cupboard with a cable under the door. We literally hung duvets around the understairs cupboard is where the washing machine is. And I propped my laptop on top of the washing machine and we hung duvets around it for sound reasons.
Have you changed your mind about anything? Do you think there's anything changing that went into the book that you need to do another book to sort of talk about?
I'm not doing
new
another book
ideas?
on this. I feel I got about 95% where I wanted, which, I did get to write it all down. Um, I was in the right place in journalism at The Economist because although I love news and I like the human interest stories, it's always the ideas that interest me. So of course there's been a million stories since, but the ideas are the same. I mean, there's this one big idea that you can screw up these two fundamental categories and then you watch it ripple out. My editor helped me a lot in structuring it, and I think the structure stood up very well. The one thing that people do ask me about is pronouns. And I would have written the book with no preferred pronouns if I did it now. But I just want to say a bit about that, which is I also coach writing. I coach writing for executives and civil servants and the like. And one of the things I say to them at the start is when you're writing, you have to be clear about your purpose, your audience, and your message. And when you think about your audience, what that means is where are they? You can't talk to people assuming that they understand what you think, assuming that you're right. That's the height of arrogance. And people understand that when they're thinking about, say, science, that your audience might be scientifically unsophisticated or very sophisticated. But if my audience is not going to listen to me if I call a man every time, then it's on me to work out what to do. It's not on them. I can't just say, well, they shouldn't be like that. So it's my job to get my message across to people wherever they are. And people have maybe moved a fair bit, actually, since I started writing the book on this. And I find it more and more, I actually can't bear it myself. Like I find a moral injury every time, in fact, that I call a man a woman. So there was one segment where I worked very hard to remove pronouns altogether, and that was the bit about Jessica Yaniv. I would have done more of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the one thing I think I'd change.
I think that's probably the most helpful way for us to progress is to, if we disagree, is to disagree, try to educate each other, to work out what's the best way of communicating and moving forward with this. So yeah, well,
And also
that's
different audiences. I'm in various chats with people that I know completely agree with me on, men are men and women are women. So there I talk about men as men and women are women. But if I were to be invited onto something else, or if I were trying to persuade a bunch of teenagers who've drunk the Kool-Aid, I'd start with where they are and work out what I want them to understand. And that's just standard good writing practice. I think every domain has its own professional norms, but also its guiding principles. And in journalism, it's don't mislead your audience. So that's why to not say trans woman. I mean, Julia Long, she's right about many, many things, but she's very specifically right on that. Nobody can remember, not even one of us, and we've been in this for years, can remember what the hell that is. Is it a man who thinks he's a woman or a woman who thinks he's a man? And you get tripped up. I still get tripped up. So if you can possibly in those spaces, you just talk about, men who identify as women or men who claim to be women or Tims or whatever it was you want to use. But in another space, you've got to do the extra cognitive work because you don't want to mislead your audience, but you also want to get your message across.
radical feminists tend to be gender abolitionists, and we want to get rid of gender. which we see as a means of oppressing women and girls. And so we sort of see it as the method by which women are oppressed, or one of the methods. So gender itself, the sex role stereotypes, the forcing of women into those boxes. And so we just say, let's just get rid of gender. And so an example would be, I haven't got any makeup on and I haven't got female hair. And I'm not dressing in the box that the patriarchy wants to put me into. So that would be rejecting, that's abolishing gender to some extent, or to, in quite a large extent, actually. Do you know, or can you shed light on what gender critical is?
So gender critical beliefs are protected, is now a legal fact in the UK. But it's like saying Christianity. Like, what does Christianity mean? Like, I was actually just writing about this myself yesterday. So to say that a belief is protected in UK law, this is relevant. This is not me trying to dodge the question, but it's not, the answer is not really going to be about gender. It has to pass the 5 Granger criteria, which is a test that's set out in a precedent-setting court case. And the 5th one is the relevant one. It's the one that says, is it worthy of respect in a democratic society, or does it inherently trample on other people's rights? So incredibly, in her first tribunal, Maya's judgment said that believing that there are 2 sexes, those sexes can't change, and that matters sometimes, was a belief that was so hateful that it trampled on other people's rights and was not worthy of respect in a democratic society. Anyway, you can't just say a belief is in that category or not. You have to know what the person believes. And that'd be true for Christianity. Like, if by Christianity you meant stone witches, stone adulteresses, burn witches, whatever it is they do to gay people, I'm not sure, in the Old Testament, then obviously that's not worthy of respect in a democratic society. But another person's Christian belief, like mainstream Christian beliefs, are. So I guess GC is the way it's used is that it's a placeholder word for any sort of belief that not just that there are 2 sexes and that the sexes can't change, but that you must pay attention to that fact on occasion, and specifically you must pay attention to that fact for women's sake. So why that's got called gender critical is a bloody good question. I mean, I tend to call it sex realist now. And then, of course, because they love twisting your words, they say that I'm trying deliberately to get the echo of race realist, which is the way that people launder racist theories about different racial groups. But all I'm saying is there are 2 sexes, and if you don't pay attention to that, you harm women because of the male default, because of male strength, because specifically it's women who need accommodation because we have the children, and that's an enormous burden on women that requires societal accommodation because of rape, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's anything to do with gender, in fact, gender critical. Like, I think it's just a placeholder phrase that ended up, for some reason, being the one that's used. It's not a good phrase for it. And I mean, this sort of rock bottom thing, I suppose it would be possible. We were trying to unpick this recently in a conversation I was having. Like, it's quite annoying that sex is real and immutable is part of a belief, because it's not a belief, it's a fact. But the thing is, facts aren't protected under UK anti-discrimination law, only beliefs. But actually, it's possible that you could believe that there are 2 sexes and that they're immutable, or know that to be a fact, but think it's totally unimportant. And that women who are saying, I need to be able to foreground this, sometimes I need to be able to say that person's a man, not a woman, or vice versa. I mean, mostly the man, not a woman, that they're just being bigots. Like, so I think quite a lot of our critics, they won't have articulated it that way, but that's the position they're in. They know perfectly well there's 2 sexes. They know which sex their mother is. They know that trans women aren't women, but they think it's very mean to say it because it doesn't matter that there are 2 sexes. So the bedrock belief, I think, the one that we have to, defend at all costs, and the belief that sex matters is specifically about, is 2 sexes, immutable, and that matters especially for women. And we might say now, and safeguarding. Not just us, but, people who care about free speech, people who care about pluralism, and actually religious people who, have very strong feelings, as I do, sort of as a hangover from my Catholic childhood, of the sort of sacredness of childhood. Like, I have a moral, ethical, disgust when I see the way that they talk about children as if they're plug and play things that you can move bits of their bodies. And I know that the emotion I'm feeling is one that comes from a feeling of sacredness and awe, even though I am atheist. So any religious person who wants to join with me on that ground is very, very welcome to. So it's a very broad church set of beliefs. was a great short summation of it all by Lucy Hunter Blackburn on Twitter today. I saw, she said, it's very interesting that you look around the world and you see it's the same three legislative elements that they go for. First is gender self-ID, which is what they want. Then the other two are a conversion therapy ban and what's the other one?
Hate speech.
Hate speech, that's right. So hate speech means that you can't talk about it. And conversion therapy ban means when it actually comes up against you, as in you are going to be forced to do something, like a parent literally forced to allow their daughter to bind her breasts or whatever, you'll have to do it. And so now they've won if they get those three. What are Sex Matters' plans for 2024 if we're free to discuss them? Well, of course, they were likely to see a change of government at some point here. I'm not saying anything that's secret here. So the current government, does have some awareness of how bad things have got. Of course, it all happened under the Conservatives. This isn't me trying to make an anti-Labour point, but we have got people in government like Kemi who understand the issues. So whatever we can get before there's a change of government, and the three most important things would be to stop any conversion therapy ban, to get decent schools guidance on the actually published, and if possible, to correct the Equality Act so that gender reassignment is entirely separate from sex. Those will be the very sort of focused things. But more generally, we think that we need to be thinking a lot more, all of us in this movement, about safeguarding principles. Because once somebody starts to think about safeguarding in this in this area, they realize just how you have to go the whole way back, and it gives you a good tool. Other people are doing specific things on, say, sports and so on, but we thought that schools were really essential because that's where the kids get indoctrinated, and also because they're closed environments where nobody has a GRC and where safeguarding is meant to come first. Healthcare will be the next thing that people need to do more, and already we're way behind on that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion philosophy. Again, this is another of those things. This is a perfect storm, isn't it? Like, you can look at it through that lens, or you can look through this lens. The sort of thinking of people as characteristics and the thinking of people as very self-defined seem to me to play an enormous part in all of this. Like, young people take it as a given that you shouldn't speak about things unless you too are a Chinese, bisexual immigrant with a single parent, or whatever your specific characteristics are. And I mean, this is so inimical to the liberal values that created science. It throws away everything that got us everything that I actually value in a modern, liberal economy. And then the idea that you define yourself also, when I've seen people who are willing to talk, the very occasional people who are willing to talk who very much disagree with the sorts of things I say, they will always say, nobody can tell you who you are except yourself. And you're like, really? I mean, loads of people can tell me that I'm middle-aged and female and a bunch of other things, Is there a fear that gender ideologues will also use the right to belief in law to win cases? Well, the right to belief in law is very, very specific to the beliefs. So if someone wants to say that they believe that men can be women, I mean, think of all the mad things that people believe, and that you can't fire them because they believe it. That's completely fine. If someone wants to believe that men can be women and they don't do anything about it at work and they don't cause trouble in the pub, then fine. But if somebody believes that men can be women, and that means that men have to be allowed to do things that directly or indirectly impact upon women's rights, then that's the argument that you'd be having about worthy of respect in a democratic society. So a man who thinks that he can do, for example, intimate exams on a woman as a doctor, when that woman has said she wants to be seen by a female doctor, that's a man who's committing sexual assault, and his belief is then not worthy of respect in a democratic society. And if he were to be sacked for doing that, he should not have protection under UK employment law. That's the way the argument would go. Hate speech, conversion therapy, and just gender self-ID in the first place. That's the basis of it. Get the gender self-ID in, make it impossible to talk about, make it impossible to stop anyone from doing what they want. When am I standing for Parliament? I would rather die. I've no patience. They spend their time it's great work, someone has to do it, but I couldn't bear it.